Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. Now, if you notice, this episode is a little different in regards to its audio. That's because I have some sad news to bring you. The red microphone that I've been using for 3 years has finally died. If you noticed my video where I did reactions to a bunch of old episodes, you'll notice that that video is really quiet. I literally don't know why. I guess the wire or something broke, or maybe something in the microphone was broken or something. But essentially, what I would have to do would be, in order for it to be normal audio, I would have to peak it to be as loud as it, to peak it so that it would be normal again. And I did that for a couple of episodes. I did it for a couple of podcasts, and it's going to be in my next video. The next video will use audio that was used in this method, but I decided to eventually just, might as well just get a new mic. I might as well have upgraded it anyways. Well, technically it's not an upgrade, it's just the same mic. I think all it is just a better version of the Blue Yeti mic, and it actually is blue. That's one difference. But I also did it because, even though nobody invites me, just in case anybody wants me to appear on their shows, now I have a microphone that can be good for that. Also, some random housekeeping business that was this is really bizarre. In that same video that I mentioned, the one with the really quiet audio, I made this very interesting thing. I was reacting to my Jack Feller episode, and during it, I was looking into Jack Feller, because I was just curious, is this guy still alive? And then during the video, I was like, he's still alive? Oh my god. And I was incredibly shocked that he was not only still alive, but he still had a somewhat prominent life. The dude was still making some newspaper appearances. The video was recorded on the 30th and then released on the 1st. However, it was after the video was released that I looked back on our campaigns, I think, and then I noticed the Jack Feller page had been updated to include a spouse. And then when I clicked the page, I looked at it, I saw that Jack Feller had passed away, and he passed away on the 31st. That is just, to me, that's really bizarre. I'm pretty sure, aside from that newspaper, which I think was already a couple months old, I was the latest person to talk about Jack Feller, and lo and behold, he died. Wow, I was making content about him. Really weird. So anyways, I guess that's really all the housekeeping that there's really is relevant to say. So let's get right into the news. The first news story comes from pink tide governments. Nicolas Maduro will be meeting with Gustavo Petro. And not just this, but other aspects have made the American media, and especially Republicans, be very mad. For those who don't know, Gustavo Petro was the first leftist leader to be elected as Colombia's president. He was elected not so recently, so he's basically become a new figurehead for the pink tide, and a lot of people are happy, and a lot of people are not so happy. Republicans were not happy about it, but there was one aspect of Petro that was sort of interesting. In the same way a lot of other pink tide leaders have to do, he sort of tiptoed a little bit in regards to his relation with Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez is, well, we all know who Hugo Chavez is, but he's somewhat a contentious figure. Is he a Chavista? Is Petro a Chavista? That's usually a common smear that is given to Latin American leftists. These are Chavistas. They're trying to become the next Hugo Chavez because they really hate Hugo Chavez. Despite the fact that in Hugo Chavez's administration,
poverty reduced by half, but extreme poverty fell from 17% to under 7%. Pensions for the elderly went from under 400,000 to over 2 million. Malnutrition, of course talked about a lot today, fell from 21% to 2%. Unemployment fell from 17% to under 6% and cut the huge infant mortality rate in half. Children in school went from 6 million to 13 million, and illiteracy was totally eradicated.
Audio clip courtesy of the Empire Files. But yeah, given all that, you would be wondering why don't people run to say we're Chavistas? But of course, big businesses don't like that. But anyways, what happens is, like, typically, like, AMLO and Pedro Castillo openly like, we are not Chavistas, like, we are, like, super not Chavistas, and Gustavo Petro sort of fell in the same, like, train. Like, he criticizes Maduro, rightfully so, and he basically distanced himself from Chavez, even though he had a pretty decent relationship with Chavez. He attended Chavez's funeral, which, I mean, I guess this doesn't technically make that much thing, because, I mean, Enrique Peña Nieto, one of the most notable neoliberals in Latin America, happened to have also attended his funeral, but also, like Petro had historically been a supporter of Chavez and what his, like, ideals were, but then he has to distance himself from it during the presidential campaign. And people were wondering, like, does this mean, like, Petro is, like, fully cutting off ties with Venezuela? Like, oh, he's gonna take this big moral grandstand against Venezuela? It's, like, clearly not. Like, that's one of the big things. Like, sure, yeah, there are people on the left that have criticisms for Venezuela, and some rightfully, some wrongfully. But, of course, it doesn't detract from the actual needs of what the countries have and need. Like, trade with... That's one of the big things. Like, Petro, when he was elected, Xiomara Castro, the new president of Honduras, has basically stated that with his election, that they should be moving forward with the idea of, like a Bolivarian union. And I think that's actually an interesting idea that will be happening. Like, there will be an actual union of left wing, like an EU for Latin America. I'd be down to see that. Though I think maybe they're going to wait until Lula gets elected before they actually start pushing for this idea harder. We'll have to wait and see how that pans out. Speaking of things we have to wait to see to pan out, a very interesting bombshell literally just dropped, and it's quite an interesting one. The FBI conducted a raid on Trump's Mar-a-Lago, and it was to search for documents. Apparently, reportedly, they were nuclear documents that Trump had stolen or something. And this has led to quite a debacle. People on the left, people on the right, people who claim to be on the left, people who claim to be on the right. Everybody is going in a huge, like, random direction. And it's quite an interesting fallout. Many people on the right are now talking about how they want to defund the FBI and they want to abolish it. Well, supposedly, like, Marjorie Taylor Greene said that, but she clearly doesn't actually believe that. And some people on the left are rightfully clowning on them, but then there's some people who claim to be on the left who say, why are you clowning on them? And it's like, clearly we're clowning on them because of the random hypocrisy. And then they go, oh, so you support the FBI now? It's like, nobody supported the FBI. Where did you pull this out of? But then there's this other aspect of it. Okay, so what happened is, many people are trying to figure out, like, why did Trump have these documents to begin with? Like, some people saying, like, oh, it's because of ego. Like, he doesn't want those documents to be leaked. Like, he doesn't want those documents to be in the hands of someone who doesn't claim to be, like, the true president. He wants to remain in power. As such, he keeps the documents. But there are some people who are saying that he was trying to do something malicious with that. There's some people making the claim that he was trying to leak these documents to our good old friends at Saudi Arabia so that they could have nuclear weapons. I don't know, and I can't really attest to this. I don't believe it, I don't disbelieve it. You need evidence before you can make this claim. But anyways, I'm going to be focusing on, like, I guess the debate, quote unquote, that has risen from this. Because, again, as I mentioned before, the right wing randomly chose this today, like, oh, now we're going to want to abolish the FBI, even though this is a position they've never held previously, they will never hold again, but now, oh, the FBI is going too far. In fact, it even becomes more apparent when you actually analyze what their actual position is. Like, they're not, like, when, like, Marjorie Taylor Greene's, like, the only one who has even said anything remotely close to abolish the FBI. But then, when you ask, like, slightly more in-depth, her in-depth actual policies are, we need to impeach Merrick Garland and get rid of the communists that have taken over the FBI. Basically what Joe McCarthy said, like, oh, our intelligence agencies are being overrun by evil commies. It's like, no, they're not. Why would communists even be an intelligence agency that is not of a communist nation? But anyways, one of the biggest pieces of like this weird debate in regards to this came from an interaction between Nina Turner and Jimmy Dore, which shows very clearly how, like, I don't even grasp how anybody can even take Jimmy Dore seriously when he clearly made up this, like, it's just so stupid. Okay, so what happened is Nina Turner tweeted, "My prediction of the fallout of the FBI raiding Mar-a-Lago is that we're probably going to see a bunch of MAGA Republicans call to abolish the FBI." Okay, so that is Nina Turner calling out the absolute fact that after the FBI Mar-a-Lago thing, a bunch of Republicans are just going to posture like, we need to abolish the FBI just because they went against Daddy Trump. Then, lo and behold, that is exactly what happened. Then Jimmy Dore screenshotted this and posted, "When lefties cheer on the FBI, you know they're serious about being a Democrat." Despite the fact that there is literally nothing in that tweet that cheers on the FBI. And one of the things that many people were saying, like, oh, all of a sudden you guys are talking about the FBI, even though, like, just last week they raided, like, the African American Socialist Party. Like, there was, like, this small Uhuru movement, is what it's called. And then it's like, they were raided by the FBI last week, and it's weird that none of you were talking about this. And it's like, that's weird. You guys weren't talking about it either. If you were talking about it, I would have seen it, bruh. But you didn't talk about it until the FBI raided Trump. That's really weird. Why are you choosing to bring this one up right now? It's like the people who were conspicuously starting to tweet out stuff about election integrity around the same time Donald Trump was saying that the election was rigged against him. Like, you're clearly not trying to say something, but you're trying to say something. It's literally just like completely random. It's like, oh, you're cheering on the FBI now? It's like, when did this happen? Who is cheering on the FBI? I'm not seeing anybody cheer on the FBI. The only thing that can be slightly cheered on is this guy who's breaking this very big law is going to potentially get punished. Hopefully Trump gets punished for this thing. If Trump literally had nuclear documents in his possession, then yeah, he should 100% be in jail right now. I mean, if you're a leftist, you should probably agree with that, yes? But of course, their audience full of like 10 million Republicans isn't going to say this, so of course they're not going to say it either. Anyways, let's move on to some more online stuff. Twitch streamer Keffals arrested after transphobic swatting. Keffals, for those who don't know, Keffals is the person who like makes low effort like tweet debunkings or something. Like, I mean, basically all I knew about Keffals was that they were a streamer who like critiqued somebody, like they critiqued the streamer Destiny, and like they got in trouble for that because you don't criticize Destiny. But then there was also this other thing like that I really didn't like Keffals for, because this kept popping up in my feed every single, like a bunch of the people I follow would like retweet like tweets from Keffal, and it would be just like their tweets would basically just be like, I've always wanted to ratio blank, like insert person that you don't like here, and that's it. Like, and I of course never liked any of those tweets because I don't support low effort content. In my viewpoint, people should spend their time actually making productive things and not stupid things. Like, for example, if, like, let's say you have this really crazy idea of, like, oh, this random guy who's going to have a disco show, and they're going to edit minors in videos, and that's going to somehow defeat fascism or something. That's stupid. Don't support low-effort content, everybody. Support high-effort content. Anybody who actually thinks an L+ ratio is an actual argument, they don't deserve anything. But that's obviously way beside the point. Keffals obviously makes actual content, but that's just like the one random things that I saw. But anyways, again, that's irrelevant to the point. As the title suggests, she was swatted because of transphobic harassment. Like, they were saying that she, while using her dead name, was threatening to kill her family or something, and she was swatted. And this is, of course, because of the rising, like, hatred for the LGBTQ. A thing that, again, like, we have to acknowledge that the left played a huge part in. And before you say, what? Yes, I am 100% going to say that the left played a huge part in this anti-LGBTQ surge that is happening. And you want to know whose fault it is? The anti-SGW leftists and or the anti-woke leftists. The people who are like, oh, we're anti-IDPO, like the ones who basically the same people who like ignored the issue after, like basically the people that did the same thing that people did with Roe v. Wade. Like, gay marriage was legalized, the issue's over, we win. The people who basically just took that and ran away. And the lefties just basically spent their entire time going like, oh, we are super, super anti-IDPO, but remaining incredibly vague on what the heck they meant by IDPO. Like, basically, like, people, like, basically what happened is you would go basically mention that you're, like, gay or something, and then you go, we're anti-IDPO here. It's like, okay, that's a random thing that you just said out of nowhere, but okay. But it's basically stuff like that. They definitely have a lot of... They gotta explain that they have a lot to blame on this. But, of course, they're not the primary blame. Like, they're just part of it. Like, the majority of it is, of course, like, the super hard right Republicans that refuse to let the issue die. Or, I guess, basically bided their time. Like, that's the thing about Republicans and the right wing, that you basically will notice. They will wait. They know they're not going to win their issues in a day, but they will wait until they can. Roe v. Wade was like a 30-year issue. They waited 30 years to get that issue. The second Roe v. Wade was decided, conservatives were planning to get rid of it. And they waited 30 years before they could. They slowly chipped the edges until they could finally pull the plug on the whole thing. Major Republicans were literally raising their kids to take up the mantle when they died to fix the issue. Like, I mean, I remember I watched like this interview with some like big conservative like figurehead. Like, I think it was like a Billy Graham or something, or like just somebody. Like, he was the head of like a super anti-abortion organization. He point blank said that he knew the issue would not be solved in his lifetime, but hopefully he could stop it in the future with his son. And conservatives were basically chipping away at Roe v. Wade for a while. First, they had some other cases that sort of basically redefined it so that there could be some wiggle room. Like, Roe v. Wade, when it was first made, it was basically a blank slate. It had very little rules in how the abortion laws would be enforced. And then they basically were like, okay, so up to the point of viability, okay. But they just said the point of viability, not the point of viability outside of the womb, but just the point of viability, which means that, hypothetically, they could wire all this doohickeys on the fetus and then it could live, and it's be like, see, since it could have hypothetically been in this case, that breaks the law. Then they'll do things that don't technically break the law, but definitely, obviously, are not really following the law to a T. Like, oh, this state has one abortion clinic, so technically the person could drive from one end of the state to this end of the state to get their abortion, but realistically they're not going to. Or they could go out of state to get it. Technically, that's not against the law. That's not against the law. They could do that. But a good 99.9% of people are not going to do that, so they've essentially just eradicated abortion in their state. Heartbeat laws, that sort of stuff, they edged it very little by little until they get to the point where they're at today. And we're getting a similar thing in regards to gay rights, even though that issue, like the abortion issue, people thought it was a done deal. Gay people get married? Okay, congratulations. The issue's over. We win. Time to go back to brunch. But then we get people that are like, oh, we're against IDPO, or, oh, we believe that you shouldn't be forced to do it. We believe that you have the right to marry, obviously, but we don't believe that you should be forced to have someone marry you too. Like religious freedom and stuff. Oh, we can respect you, who you are as a person, and refer to you by your chosen name and stuff, but you don't have to have us define you as a man. Look, we're fine with gay people being represented in media, but just not in children's media. We don't want to force our children to go in that direction. We're fine with adults transitioning, just not children transitioning. You know, like, again, they're going step by step until they can get to a point where they can try and pull the plug again. And the right wing is getting more troublesome, so this time period is getting a little bit shorter. But thankfully, that might actually be both a benefit and a negative. Negative in case they actually manage to win, but a positive in the sense that since they're being so brazen people are basically waking up to this issue a lot more earlier than they should be. Like, quote unquote should be. Like, libs didn't really care about the gay rights. They're like, oh yeah, of course we support gay people and blah blah blah, and we'll protect your rights and blah blah blah. Like the typical like lib or like progressive left type stuff. But of course they didn't really feel like that was an actual threat until Roe v. Wade got overturned. The right wing got a little too cocky. So now they're kicking into overdrive. Many people were saying like, oh, Democrats are going to lose the midterms. Many people are saying like this might have reinvigorated the Democrats to go out and turn out to vote. Speaking of voting, there's the story that has just come out about the North Carolina Senate race again. Basically, the issue is finally over. The Democrats tried to do like a last minute like, oh, we're going to try and keep Matthew Hoh off the ballot. But sure enough, that didn't pan out, and the judges were basically like, dude, it's pretty obvious what you're doing. Stop it. So Matthew Hoh will be on the ballot come November, and this basically guarantees that I will be voting in November, which of course makes a bunch of down-ballot races very worried, because now I'm going to have to start looking into the down-ballot races, particularly the nonpartisan ones. But anyways, speaking of voting, there were some states that recently voted on some elections. So we'll go over them, I guess. It was actually a pretty good night on the 9th, because basically all of the races that had progressives in them were victories. First, we'll start off with Wisconsin. Mandela Barnes won the Senate race. Though to be fair, he was not only basically John K. Fettermaning the race, but also all of the high-profile candidates dropped out at the last second, so it was essentially a done deal. What we're worried about now is November, because Ron Johnson, he is an incumbent. He's a somewhat weak incumbent, but he's definitely not weak enough to still be in. He flipped Russ Feingold, and Russ Feingold wasn't able to beat him again, so maybe Mandela Barnes' new blood will be able to do so. Another really small race that nobody's talked about, for obvious reasons, is the Wisconsin Secretary of State race. The only reason I'm mentioning it is because the guy who is in the race was a guy by the name of Douglas La Follette, and before you wonder, yes, he is related to Robert M. La Follette. The exact way he is related, I don't know. Some people say he's a cousin, some people say he's like a nephew, but it doesn't matter. All that matters is that he is, he's a pretty progressive guy. Now on to Minnesota. We have two victories. First, Keith Ellison for Attorney General. Again, it was pretty much done deal. I think he was the only candidate running. I think he had like a small primary challenge, I don't remember. But he wasn't important. The big race of the night was, of course, Minnesota District 5, the seat that Ellison used to hold and is currently held by Ilhan Omar. This was a pretty high-profile race because, it was basically like Cori Bush and Rashida Tlaib a while ago. Like, they're high-profile because, the squad might be going or the squad might lose. But the thing is, what ended up happening is, of course, Ilhan Omar won. But there was a problem. She didn't win by a decent margin. She won by a very slim margin. And of course, many people are like, uh-oh, because everybody is taking this interpretation as, very different. Some people are saying, see, this is them rebuking this anti-Semitic rhetoric that Ilhan Omar is espousing, which makes no sense because all the exact same allegations of anti-Semitism that went to Ilhan Omar were directed to her predecessor, Keith Ellison, and Keith Ellison kept winning. Some people saying, oh, this is directed at her super far left rhetoric that clearly is hurting the district, which that doesn't make sense either because, again, her predecessor was Keith Ellison, one of the furthest left Democrats in his House tenure. The only thing that makes Ilhan Omar further to left than him is that she describes herself as a socialist. That's literally it. Her and Ellison essentially agree on 100% of the issues. Some people say this is a very big issue about the Israeli PAC money. It's well, yeah, maybe. Very obviously, if I had to hedge my bets, I'd say that this might be the seat. This might be the one that they effectively target next cycle. Because the thing is, in 2020, like, there were a ton of primary challenges against AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and all the, like, it was primary races against those three. And this time, they basically did the same thing, except not against AOC or Ayanna Pressley, but just on Corey, Ilhan, and Rashida. At least for, like, the squad. Like, there were some squad tertiary people that, of course, they had. They did try to get, like, the primary bit of, like, Mondaire Jones versus Jamal Bowman, but that didn't really pan out. But essentially, they've been spreading themselves thin on regards to these primary bids. But I think the next cycle, they're finally going to piece together, like, okay, we need to focus on one, and this is basically, like, their last test run before they start taking seriously. So I think the next one, like, be wary of Ilhan Omar specifically. She's the next target. Don't let any other district fool you. Ilhan Omar is the target. And the last criticism that many people have pointed out is that apparently, like, I mean, allegedly, I don't know fully in depth, that Ilhan Omar didn't really campaign that well for the seat. Because I guess she assumed that she was going to have the Keith Ellison advantage. Especially considering her last race with Anton Milano Mo. But again, clearly it shows she's going to need to at least focus a little bit more on the races. And lastly, we have the Bernie home state of Vermont. So basically, we just had a ton of W's there. First, the lieutenant governor's race had David Zuckerman win again. I didn't endorse him, and I don't think I will because, again, like, I don't really care about governor's races, really. Like, I don't really care about, like, I don't really care about state-specific races. I mean, I care about, like, the House or in the Senate because those are people that actually still represent me, but governor of Vermont or lieutenant governor of Vermont doesn't really matter. Plus, apparently Zuckerman said some anti-vax stuff that's, like, kind of cringe. But the thing is, the two high-profile ones were the Senate race and the House race because we had a little bit of musical chairs in that area. So what happened is, of course, we all know Patrick Leahy decided to finally leave the Senate for good. So then the House member, Peter Welch, decided that he was going to run for the Senate seat, and that left the House seat vacant. And many people were saying, like, many people basically said, like, this was basically just the opportunity to get the first female representative from Vermont. Like, that was basically it. And a ton of women ran for the seat. Kesha Ram-Insdale, what's her name? Chase Clifford, and Becca Balint, and Molly Gray, who was the current lieutenant governor, who dropped out so that Zuckerman could get back in the lieutenant governor's mansion. Basically, like, again, like, musical chairs. I guess the idea was, like, Welch runs for Senate, Gray runs for House, and then Zuckerman runs back for his old seat. I guess that was the plan. But what ended up happening is that Becca Balint, who was a progressive candidate, won. And Kesha and Clifford were also progressives, but they backed out of the race. So, gratefully, Becca Balint is going to be the one representing Vermont in the next legislature. And I actually predicted that she was going to win because she got Bernie's endorsement. Like, not that long before the race, like, I guess right before early voting happened, like, Bernie said, I endorse Becca Balint, and I quote tweeted that tweet and said, congratulations on Becca for winning, because Bernie is 100%, like, super popular in Vermont, obviously, so, of course, he's going to be the kingmaker in a lot of these races. I wonder who he's going to pick for his, like, successor. That'll be interesting to see. So, anyways, with that out of the way, I guess it's time to finally talk about the main topic of this video. Oh boy, I think a lot of you were expecting, like, two different possible foreign elections to talk about, and didn't expect me to talk about this one, or maybe you did, but essentially, like what happened is this race basically just popped up out of nowhere, and so it's like, okay, I guess now I'm going to talk about this one, especially considering, like, quite an interesting thing is happening, and the fact that I did a big sigh makes you realize the interesting thing is not really a good thing. Just because it's interesting doesn't mean it's good. Basically, I made the vow that one specific foreign election will be the last one I talk about this year. And I guess that just bumps 2 more up. We're going through this one, so here's to the next 2 when we do them. But for right now, let's talk about Italy. Italy, like a lot of countries post-2016, saw a rise of populism, both right-wing populism and not. Going into their 2018 elections, which were basically like coinciding with the US midterm elections, which was basically like the peak of this sort of like beginning of the populist movement around the world, we saw a rise in 2 populist movements in Italy. Now, usually for these kinds of things, I try to keep the party names vague, but I decided, this is stupid, I'm not going to do that. The 2 movements in question were Lega and the Five Star Movement. Both of these groups were populist parties, and basically they rode the populist wave of 2016, 2018. But they both ran in sort of different directions of populism. League was an openly right-wing populist party. Meanwhile, the Five Star Movement, wasn't. To be very blunt, they're basically what you consider when you hear the term populist. Their politics were basically they were populist and anti-establishment. Nothing else. If anything, if you were being generous, you could call them centrist, or even to a degree libertarian. To describe them basically is like they're basically like sort of they were basically like the libertarian party of Italy, but not in like the sense of like they're a libertarian party, but in the sense of they were basically just the third option. Like they were the Reform Party, they were the Libertarians, they were the Green Party. Like they were just the one who just happened to be the most viable alternative to whatever the 2 main parties were at the time. If you wanted to reject the 2 major parties of Italy, you would vote for the Five Star Movement. But in 2018, something interesting happened. The Five Star Movement won a plurality of the districts in their parliament. So as such, this movement that had essentially built itself up as an anti-establishment populist party now had to become the establishment. But they couldn't do it alone because they only had a plurality. They didn't have a majority, so they had to form a coalition with somebody. So, on June 1st, 2018, they formed the first all-populist government in Europe, which included the Five Star Movement and Lega. The government would be led by an independent by the name of Giuseppe Conte. However, very quickly, a very avowed right-wing populist group and a vaguely populist group started having some disagreements. So, they decided, we don't really want to join this coalition with the League anymore. So, Lega is league in Italian, for those who don't know. So they decided, we're going to remove our coalition from, we're going to say we're not going to be in a coalition with League anymore. So now we're going to be joining up in a coalition with the main center-left party of Italy. Because since the party was so vague on its ideology, they could easily just join a coalition with either of them and just say, we'll agree with you on this. And this coalition began right around the time COVID started becoming a very big thing in the world. And if you don't remember, Italy was regarded as one of the worst COVID responses very early on in the pandemic. And that essentially became what the Conte administration was known for. And as with the last coalition, eventually this coalition started having some tensions as well, particularly in regards to how they would kickstart the economy over again. And after some votes of confidence that didn't go so well, Giuseppe Conte decided that he was just going to step down as prime minister because there was no way he could form a new government. And when a prime minister resigns, what happens is you either have to form a new government or you have to do a new election. Since they were in the middle of the COVID pandemic, they didn't want to go through a new election. So the Five Star Movement, Lega, and the center-left party decided to put aside their differences and form a massive unity government to try and contain the COVID pandemic and make sure that things wouldn't go awry. And they chose an independent by the name of Mario Draghi to be their new prime minister. And the agreement would be they get COVID taken care of before they start messing around and trying to fight each other on certain policies. And as COVID has winded down, the coalition has fallen apart. And as such, we got a new election. In fact, this is the one that we're talking about right now. But back to Conte. Conte has actually done something that has kind of changed things up for this election. You see, one of the major things that Conte didn't like was that he felt that the parliament was too big. He felt that it was too, full of random people. So he decided that he was going to lower it. The Chamber of Deputies used to be 630 members. Now it's only 400 members. The Senate used to be 315 members, but now it is only 200 members. So he's winded it down to a consistent number. And that's the one thing that you can technically say is an accomplishment of his. Even though usually when people complain about legislature sizes, they usually complain that they're too small. But I guess he felt that it was too big. But anyways, I guess we should move on to the party/candidates, because we're going to get into quite a lot for this one, because the thing is, there are quite a number of parties in Italian politics. You see, because Italian politics is sort of it's really weird. There are a lot of sovereign parties in certain areas of the country that have power there, but don't really have any power in the rest of the country. There are some parties that basically form coalitions with other parties, but then they form other coalitions. I've had to rewrite this section of the video a ton of times, because there are some parties that would form a coalition with one party, but then I'd check back the next day and that coalition has broken apart. And then not only that, one of the parties in that coalition has broken up into two parties. So as you can see, there's been a ton of shifts in Italian politics, especially in the past couple of days as the coalitions have started to settle. But I think the coalitions have officially been settled, and thankfully we can actually piece together very clearly. Italian politics is now currently divided into three factions: the center-right coalition, the center-left coalition, and the ones in no coalition. It's a common thing that parties of generally similar political viewpoints will coalesce with each other before they have to move forward to try and coalesce with people outside of those groups. Now, the center-left coalition doesn't necessarily... the center-left coalition can basically include anybody from the center to the left, and the center-right coalition can include people who are from the center to the right. It doesn't necessarily mean that all the parties in the coalition are center-right, or that all the parties... it basically just means if you average the ideologies of every group in the party, that would basically be where the coalition ends up politically. We get people who are not in the coalitions that would probably fit in one of the coalitions, but I guess they just feel they're too ideologically pure to be part of this coalition. And you can kind of see why when we get into it. Just for the sake of accuracy, we're going to go through them all the parties that are here, that are listed, that are viable, but then we're going to get into the ones that are quote-unquote actually viable, and I'm going to explain why I'm going through the parties, even though I'm already mentioned coalitions. So let's begin. First, we have the people without a coalition, and in that group, we start off with the Sovereign and Popular Party. It's a really small sovereigntivist coalition made up of a couple of really small parties. And the reason, these parties basically have nothing in common with each other except that they're, really small parties that I guess want to have more of a mainstream voice. The leader of this coalition, I guess, is the leader of the Italian Communist Party, Marco Rizzo. Not much else I can say about them. Now let's move on to the next party, Italexit. It's a smaller populist party with the goal of taking Italy out of the EU. It split from the Five Star Movement in 2020. Their PM candidate is Gianluigi Paragoni. He was a senator in the Italian parliament. The next party is the People's Union. It's a smaller left-wing populist coalition that is essentially formed to oppose the Ukrainian war. It's basically a merger of communist groups and dissidents from the Five Star Movement. Their PM candidate is Luigi De Magistris, an MEP, a former MEP and the mayor of Naples. Now, the next one is sort of a weird coalition. It's going to take a little bit more to explain this one. Action Plus Italia Viva. Now, for those who don't know, the party name is Action Plus, I think. But in this one, it's I guess I used good wordplay, Action Plus Italia Viva. You see, these are actually two parties, but they are forming a joint list for this election cycle. It's basically like Action Plus is a pro-European party that is basically anti-populist. And Italia Viva is a liberal political party formed by Matteo Renzi. Matteo Renzi used to be the leader of the big center-left party, but he left and is now being part of this coalition. He used to be part of the center-left coalition for a bit, but I don't remember. I guess he changed his mind. Matteo Renzi was sort of like a Keir Starmer or like an Ed Miliband. Like, oh, we're taking back He's not necessarily, like, I guess he is technically centrist, but he was basically trying to be like, I'm not like a super centrist, but I'm not like a loony left guy. The leader of this coalition is member of the European Parliament, Carlo Calenda. And of course, the biggest one who is not in a coalition is the Five Star Movement, a populist party that used to be in charge. Like I said before, they really don't have any clear ideology. Basically, whatever you think populist is, that's what it is. They have very vague answers in regards to most of their policy positions, and they really only are good outside of the governing positions because when they governed, it didn't turn out so well. Their PM candidate is Giuseppe Conte, who has officially become a member of the Five Star Movement. Quite an interesting endeavor for him. I guess I should be blunt in saying the only person who's not in a coalition that actually has a chance of winning is the Five Star Movement, but even then that's being a little bit generous. It's only because they have governed before, so we can't necessarily count them out. But I guess technically we can't count out the rest of the people who are not in coalitions because maybe this is the year of a Tal exit. If you're tired of the independent parties, I guess we should actually move on to coalitions. First, we'll start off with the center-left coalition. The fact that I'm starting off with the center-left coalition should probably give you a little bit of worry. The first member of the coalition is More Europe, a liberal party that advocates against populism and for the EU. If you may notice, I actually used that biography before to describe Action Plus, and originally Action Plus and More Europe were in a coalition. I'm just now realizing that More Europe is the one with the plus, not Action, so it wasn't wordplay. It was literally just me saying that they're in a coalition together. Anyways, they are led by a former member of parliament, Benedetto della Vedova. The next member of the alliance is the Greens and Left Alliance. As the name suggests, they are an eco-socialist red-green alliance that has actually taken their inspiration from Mélenchon's coalition in the latest elections in France. Like, basically, like, if it works for him there, it could work for us here. If you don't know, red plus green equals, like, a red-green alliance is socialism plus environmentalism. The members of this little alliance are the Italian Left, a democratic socialist party, Green Europe, a green political party, and Greens, a regionalist green party in South Tyrol. Their coalition is one of those ones that has two leaders, Deputy Nicola Frationi, who is a deputy who is leading the Italian Left, and former deputy Angelo Bonelli, who leads Green Europe. The next member of the coalition is Civic Commitment, a centrist pro-EU party that split from the Five Star Movement due to them wanting to support Ukraine. Basically what happened was the Five Star Movement was critical of Ukraine during the Russia-Ukraine war, so a couple of their, like, and the thing is, like, they took a stance on the Russia-Ukraine war, and that has led to some members of the party thinking that they took a too much of a moderate stance to, like, they took a stance too pro-Ukrainian, but this people, like this coalition, obviously believe that they felt that the argument was that they were too pro-Russian. Their PM candidate was former leader of the Five Star Movement, Luigi Di Maio, and the last member of this coalition is the Democratic Party. Not that one, but yes, that one. A social democratic party that dominates the center-left of Italy. Their PM candidate is Enrico Letta, a former prime minister of a grand coalition. Grand coalitions, for those who don't know, are coalitions of many parties from across the political aisle, usually meaning like there was a very extreme circumstance that caused that party to form a coalition together. Like, for those who don't know, like, basically, like, similar to our Democratic Party, this Democratic Party basically had a little bit of a fight over who should lead their party, the center of the center-left or the left-wing faction. And what happened was the left-wing faction tried to lead in the middle of the two elections, but things weren't necessarily going their way, so the party decided to shift back to the center. And Letta is essentially like a Tony Blair. Basically, that's all he is. He's there to basically, like, say, like, we're not too radical. And you could probably take a guess and figure out that Letta is definitely the most likely to be PM of that coalition. As you can see, that coalition, like the center-left coalition, as you can tell, definitely leans a lot more centrist than left. And that's what I mean. Like, when they say center-left coalition, it can be a center-to-left coalition. And you're going to get a lot of that with the next coalition as well, but in a somewhat opposite direction. You have the center-right coalition. The first member of the coalition is a political group called Us Moderates. It's an alliance of centrist, South Christian Democratic parties. Their leader is Maurizio Lupi. This is basically like their least popular party within the group. The next party is Forza Italia. It's a liberal conservative party that was formed by former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, which was a reformation of his party called Forza Italia, which is basically just a platform for him to try and make a political comeback. Because during the, like, rise of right-wing populism, he's like, I can make a comeback with this wave, because he was basically seen as one of those right-wing populist leaders. And as you can tell, he is leading the party. There's really not much else I can say about him. Now, the next one is Lega, a right-wing populist party led by Matteo Salvini. It's basically like a standard right-wing populist party. Like, basically, like, as we can see, like, Us Moderates is, like, center-right. Forza Italia is basically, like, center-right to right. And Lega is basically, like, right-wing to, like, leans a little bit farther than right-wing. Or maybe, like, Forza Italia is, like, mainstream, like, conservatism. And Lega is, like, traditional, like, not conservative. But the last member of this coalition, oh boy, is definitely going to be one that worries you a bit. It's Fratelli d'Italia, or Brothers of Italy. It is a national conservative party that just so happens to trace its roots to the Italian neo-fascist movement. Let's take a look. Brothers of Italy, Fratelli d'Italia, was formed on December 17th, 2012. They split from a group called the People of Freedom. So let's look at the People of Freedom. The People of Freedom was a group that was founded by a merger of Forza Italia and the National Alliance. Forza Italia, we already know who they are, but who's this National Alliance people? Let's click them to figure out. National Alliance, very similar logo to Forza d'Italia. It is a group, it's a conservative, national conservative movement that was preceded by the Italian social movement. Who's the Italian social movement? Let's click them and have a look. What's that? It's the Fire from the Brothers d'Italia movement. Let's take a look at them. They are a neo-fascist nationalist national conservative party. They were preceded by the Republican Fascist Party. Who are the Republican Fascist Party? It's a political party in Germany led by Benito Mussolini during the German occupation of central and northern Italy, and was the sole legal ruling party of the Italian Social Republic. But just for the sake of accuracy, let's proceed it a little bit more. The National Fascist Party, this is the one that you're probably the most familiar with. It has that very familiar logo. Well, not the fire. Like, the fire is... Well, I mean, when I say the familiar logo, I'm talking about, like, the fascist symbol. The fire doesn't come in until, like, a little bit later, as I said before. But as you can tell, like, there is a literal direct line from the party right here to the Italian Fascist Party. That definitely seems a bit worrisome. They are led by a woman by the name of Giorgia Meloni. She's quite an eccentric political figure. A controversial one is her stance on Liberation Day. For those who don't know what Liberation Day is, It is the day that celebrates the victory of the Italian resistance movement against Nazi Germany, and she claims that we shouldn't do that. She endorses the Great Replacement. She's extremely Islamophobic. The fire in that party symbol is supposed to represent the flame of Mussolini's remains. Very troublesome, very worrying. And by this point, you've probably pieced together why I've mentioned this party last. Notice how I mentioned the Five-Star Movement last for the No Coalition people, the Democratic Party last for the Center-Left Coalition, and the fact that I mentioned this party last should tell you that this party is the one that is... This party is the most likely of the center-right coalition to be viable. And even more so when you look at the polls. The polls show very bad things. First, if you do coalition voting, the center-right coalition is dominating over the center-left coalition and the Five-Star Movement. But then you go by individual parties, we can tell who are the frontrunners. Very early on in the election, right when the Five-Star Movement was, let's start all the way at the beginning. Right when they first did back in 2018, that's when polls first started going on about the next elections, Five-Star was dominating. Then as Five-Star was not really living up to expectations, League started dominating. And in fact, they kept dominating very much so. But then COVID happened, and League had to end up joining a coalition with the Democratic Party and the Five-Star Movement. So that's when things started going awry. Even more so when I add one small factor. Of all of the mainstream Italian parties, do you know who wasn't in that massive coalition with the Draghi government? Fratelli d'Italia, the Brothers of Italy. They remained on the outside, thus keeping their anti-establishment roots. Meanwhile, the League essentially gave up any credence of them being the right-wing anti-establishment party when they teamed up with what was perceived to be the establishment. And as such, they started dominating the polls as well. League has essentially disappeared from the a mainstay. If you have the graph on the if you have the graph, you'll notice they've League and them intersected, and then League just starts going down, down, down. And by this point, it is basically them versus the Democratic Party. First, the ones basically right before the coalitions officially panned out were, they basically just lead with very slim margins. 0.5%, 0.2%, 1.3, 0.5, 0.8, 4, 0.1, 1.3, 0.5, 1.8, 0.1, 1.2, 1.3, 0.7, 0.4. Ugh, it's bad. And the Democratic Party, here's their most recent showings for their favoritism. 2.0, 0.4, 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, tie. Ooh, definitely not. Definitely not necessary. I mean, I hate to say losing battle, but I mean, this isn't necessarily looking good. In this particular scenario, I'm not necessarily in the know to know with Italian politics. I basically had some knowledge prior, but then looked a lot further into it while preparing for this video. And, it's pretty obvious, Democratic Party is definitely leading a lot more center this coalition, this cycle. That stinks. But it's in this parliamentary system, when literally all that you have to go by is like how many people you votes for this particular party, it's oof. Italy's quite in a tough position. Other left-wing parties that aren't in coalitions, I mean, is it too late to sign up for the center-left coalition? I don't know what to do. If I was heading any of those, smaller, left-wing parties, I'd probably be hitting up center-left coalition. There's really not much else I could say. I'm not endorsing Letta. I don't really care about Letta. It's I like the Democratic Party's, the Italian Democratic Party's platform, and the idea that they're trying to push some more progressive agendas, at least on the surface. And hopefully that would be the hypothetical direction that they go if they win. So we'll have to wait and see how that pans out. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and click that bell to notify when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, check me out who's on the Independent Political Report, or consider supporting me on Patreon.